Because of the pressing situation in Europe, the EU is now proposing a 30-day restriction on non-essential travel into the bloc. Now, this would include the Schengen zone. You can see it marked here in dark blue. This is the 22 EU states which essentially have no border controls between them at all. All of the other EU states will also be invited to take part too. Here's the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen.
I think of utmost importance is that neighbouring countries harmonise their measures so that this is the same strong message to the people that the member states are conveying, because here this increases then the certainty for people to know that it is, yes, difficult at the moment being, but it's for the best of their health, and for the moment this is necessary.
Now, let's be clear, this is a proposal that needs to be approved by EU member states. Their leaders will be meeting tomorrow. Here's the BBC's Europe editor, Katya Adler, assessing these new EU proposals.
The Commission is one thing. So, of course, this proposal has come from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. But she can propose this measure. It's the individual EU national leaders that then have to sign up to it. Now, you could ask why she's proposed it, because from a public health perspective, the coronavirus is already well and truly here in Europe. The World Health Organization described Europe already last week as the epicenter right now of the pandemic. Travel restrictions, scientists say, have a limited value in preventing the spread of the virus. Certainly they would help European citizens feel they were being protected, that some kind of fortress Europe were being erected. But the number of exceptions that would go into this ban mean that for many of the countries who've imposed their own unilateral national border measures, like Germany, like the Czech Republic, like Poland, this Fortress Europe idea is unlikely to really go far enough, and they're likely to insist to want to keep their own travel bans in place. And that goes against one of the real reasons behind the Commission proposal, and that is to provide a Europe-wide response to the coronavirus, also for public relations reasons, because many are those right now who say, look, here's another crisis like the migration crisis, where it turns out that European Union, not really. It's every country for themselves. And the Commission wants to say, no, we really do act together and there's no need to impose these border restrictions. The Commission is also worried about the big impact on the Eurozone, not only the huge pressures already in place on big economies, Italy, Spain and France, but also the fact that as individual countries inside the European Union impose those border restrictions, you have lorries blocking at the border. It is slowing down the free movement of goods that's so important inside the single market. So, it's also these political reasons and economic reasons that are pushing for this travel ban. But that list of exceptions is just going to prove too long for certain member states in order to lift their own restrictions already in place.
I'm interested you mentioned the Eurozone. We've seen the Federal Reserve in the US take reasonably drastic action on behalf of the American economy. Can we expect the European Central Bank to turn to this issue again in order to provide some more stability for the Eurozone?
Well, do you remember Mario Draghi, the former president of the ECB? He became famous and the markets reacted very quickly when he says, we'll do whatever it takes. The markets haven't really heard that message from Christine Lagarde loud enough. She's the current president of the ECB. The ECB did come out with a whole package of measures last week, but some countries like France, Emmanuel Macron says it wasn't enough and he wants more. And when you look at the Eurozone, it is going to need help. Traditionally, when you look at Italy, Italy was always judged too big to fail. Well, it is groaning already under the strain of the coronavirus. It is going to need help. The Eurozone is going to need help. And so we are expecting to hear more measures that will be taken. It is one of those situations where, the European Union is an artificial construct. It's something that many in the EU really believe in. But of course, for political leaders, they're putting their own nations first, but it doesn't mean that they're turning their back on the EU as a whole. One example is the sharing between the member states of protective clothing, like face masks, for example, or ventilators, which EU leaders have, after a little bit of disagreement at the beginning, but they have agreed to share amongst themselves. So we've seen 1 million face masks arriving in Italy today, for example, through Germany. So I think it's too early to write off the European Union or the Eurozone over the coronavirus, but strains and pressures there certainly are.
Now, let's be clear, individual European countries have already either completely or partially closed their borders. I've highlighted some of them: Russia, Georgia, Hungary, Serbia and Germany. And let's hear more about Germany. Here's Jenny Hill in Berlin.
The border closures, the government would argue, are partial. These are the borders with France, Switzerland and Austria, and long queues have built up at the land borders this morning after those controls were introduced. Put simply, anyone without a valid reason for travelling will be turned away. Exemptions are for goods vehicles, people bringing freight backwards and forwards, and also for commuters who will, we're told, have to prove that they're going to and from their place of work.
Next, we're going to focus on Spain. It's imposed a partial lockdown on the 47 million people who live there. This is part of a 15-day state of emergency. People are being barred from leaving home except in certain circumstances. We also got these pictures coming in earlier. They're showing the military helping to disinfect train stations. They're also working in supermarkets too. And the military's out on the streets telling people who are out that they need to go home. Now, the outbreak in Spain is very much focused on Madrid, and the BBC's Damien Grammaticus is there.
Anyone who was out, the police have been circulating in cars here in Madrid and elsewhere, spotting anyone who's out, telling them to go back home if they don't have a good reason, and those reasons you're allowed to be out for are very limited. They are to go to work, so people are able to continue working, but many people should be doing that from home. They're able to go out to buy food, but only singly, only one at a time from a household. They're able to go out for emergencies, and other than that, it's only people providing basic services or important services who should be out and about.
Well, Spain's hospitals are now telling patients who have the coronavirus that they can't be admitted unless their symptoms are very serious, and that's leading to a number of very distressing cases, like one that was illustrated in a BBC report. And I can show you these pictures earlier, showing us a Spanish woman who had just lost her husband to the virus. She also has it, but doctors have told her she has to go home and rest. She can't be admitted because they say she's not sick enough. And you can see she's being comforted by her children, and they are also putting themselves at serious risk of contracting the disease by comforting her. But of course, you can understand the huge difficulties and the decisions that people are having to make within their families, and the difficulty of the decisions that are being taken by doctors and by hospitals. Well, next we shift to Italy, because it remains the country worst affected by this outbreak other than China. It has over 20,000 cases, close to 2,000 deaths. Sima Katechas in Rome.
The Prime Minister says one of his priorities is to make sure that doctors and nurses are protected from the virus so that they can continue working. Another concern for the government is that the virus could move in bulk from the north to the south of the country, because thousands of people have moved from the north to the south in recent weeks. The south is a lot poorer, hospitals are not as well equipped, and today the newspapers are reporting that the Prime Minister has said that the peak of the cases has not been reached yet. So it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.